Hello and welcome to the 8th in a series of development and support webinars delivered by the NIHR Academy. My name is Holly Viles and I work in the Academy as Development and Support Manager. This webinar, Building a Culture to Empower and Motivate, is delivered in collaboration between the NIHR Academy and Oakridge, one of our leadership development programme partners. For those joining us live, if you wish to get a copy of the slides from this webinar, there'll be a link available at the end of the session to an evaluation form where you can provide us with your email address and also give your feedback on the webinar. This webinar will be facilitated by Blanchard and Clare, both senior consultants at Oakridge who have extensive experience in behavioural and cultural change and are passionate about helping people and teams to achieve their full potential. Jo, I'll now hand over to you.
Thank you, Holly, and welcome everybody to our webinar today. Mark and I are delighted to be here with you to share our thoughts on building a culture to empower and motivate. So many of you have joined us today, so to ensure that we get the best from the session, we've turned off the audio and the video to help protect the bandwidth. And of course, there's no need to worry about background noise. We do really want to hear from you though, so we'll be using polls throughout the session and we'll open up the Q&A at the end. So please do submit any questions that you have at any time through the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. And finally, for any tech issues, please use the chat function. So what we're going to cover today, we're going to think about what is empowerment and why is it so important. Think about how we can empower others, but critically, how can we create the right conditions for empowerment to be successful and to become embedded in the culture of our teams and our organisations. So before we dive into it, let's just take a few moments to think about the word empowerment and what it means to you. When looking at wording around empowerment, we found these great words from Dolly Parton that summed it up for us from a leadership perspective. And empowerment for us is about giving people the freedom and the responsibility to accomplish the goals and objectives without telling them exactly what to do, when to do it, and how to do it. And we really believe that empowering others is the key to motivating people at work. So why is empowerment so key in a research organisation such as NIHR? Well, Wellcome undertook some research recently. It was published in January 2020 with 4,000 researchers at every stage of their career to ask what they thought about the culture that they worked in. And there's lots of great findings in the report, but we were specifically interested in the response to the question, what words would you use to describe an ideal research culture? And here you can see the word cloud. The word cloud meaning that the bigger the words, the more likely, the more times those words were used and repeated. So looking at those words you can see in the word cloud, take a moment to pick out the words that suggest to you how it might feel to be empowered. So Mark, what words stand out for you here?
Well, for me, I mean, definitely things like supportive really resonate with me. Inspiring, exciting, they're kind of the empowering words that are coming through for me. Yeah,
I think freedom, although it's quite small, freedom to do, as we mentioned already, collaborative, open, innovative and creative. So some of these words can really describe what we would see as a great empowerment culture. And we really believe that by empowering your team, you can achieve the research culture that researchers have identified as being ideal. So take a few moments to think about these three questions. What inspires you about your work? How much autonomy do you have right now? And how do you feel when you work in flow? And when we talk about working in flow, we mean those moments when you're completely focused on the task in hand. You forget about yourself, you forget about others, about the world around you, and lose all track of time. Maybe you can answer these questions right now, but you might need some more time to reflect on them. I think the one that we're particularly interested in just now is that question 2, and how much autonomy do you feel that you have? So thinking back to how we defined empowerment and the freedom to do what you want, when you want, and how you'd like to do it, how much autonomy do you have right now? How empowered do you feel? Mark's going to launch a poll for us.
Here we go to launch polling. Hopefully you should see the poll in front of you. Excellent. Votes are coming through. Almost there. Everyone's very quick today. It's brilliant.
Yes, motivated.
80%, 81. So closing the poll in 3, 2, 1. Let's share the results. Great stuff. So what we've got, Joe, is about 4 out of 5. So from the audience today, about 80% are 3 or 4. That's
fantastic. So they're feeling fairly motivated, quite motivated, obviously with room for improvement. And of course, if we can identify those benefits of empowerment for ourselves and how it feels for ourselves, we're much more likely to be able to empower others successfully. So, thinking about those benefits and what we've identified, what are the other benefits of empowerment? So firstly, empowerment builds motivation. We've already talked about how empowering others can really help build motivation. And we'll talk a bit more about that later. As a leader, of course, by empowering the team to take more responsibility, it's going to free time up for yourself. You'll be able to delegate more effectively and focus on perhaps more strategic and more areas rather than the day-to-day, less operational activity, but much more strategic. When we do empower or feel empowered, we feel engaged. So we're more connected to what we're doing and we can feel that we own that piece of work. It builds trust. It builds trust between the leader and the colleague. I trust you to empower me, and I'm going to take that empowerment that you're offering me, but also I trust to be able to empower you. I know you're going to take that responsibility and deliver when I ask you to. It helps us feel valued, again, linking back to trust, because we're being trusted to take ownership. We can often solve problems quicker or better because we're getting support and help. We're getting more involvement, more input, and therefore better outcomes. It enhances creativity. And again, the more people that get involved and get more empowered to work within areas perhaps that they less commonly work in, increases that diversity of thinking, of experience and perspective. And it boosts confidence. By feeling trusted and taking ownership and having the right balance of challenge and support, we can build our confidence to take on more and more. So Mark, what are the benefits you really feel when you feel empowered?
I think it's that energy and that building that trust really comes through. That really helps me feel empowered. Great.
Okay. We're going to dive into two of those benefits a little deeper. We've already mentioned motivation, and we're going to look at engagement as well. So first, engagement. The more empowered a person is, they're more likely to feel engaged with the organisation and more connected to the work they're doing, which again fuels that sense of ownership. And we've got some recent statistics from Gallup around empowerment and engagement. And there's lots of research that tells us engaged employees are healthier, happier, more fulfilled, more motivated. And also those measures of engagement go hand in hand with higher performance. More broadly, positive relationships between empowerment, employee engagement and other organisational metrics include things like patient satisfaction, productivity, innovation, staff retention, efficiency and better health and safety performance. So there's a real case for building engagement and building engagement through empowerment. Secondly, we wanted to focus on intrinsic motivation. And intrinsic motivation means that you're motivated to do something because you really want to do it, or it's really important to you or the organisation. And that's versus extrinsic motivation, which is doing something to seek reward or to avoid a punishment. Intrinsic motivation is that force that means you work because you love it or you value it, rather than just for the salary and the income that it affords you. And work completed by Dan Pink at Harvard Business School suggests that if we can work with autonomy, we have the opportunity to develop mastery in what we do and understand the purpose of why we are doing what we do, then we're much more likely to be intrinsically motivated and therefore more satisfied with our work and feel more empowered as a result. Connecting with purpose engages us on an emotional level first, which creates a much stronger connection to our work in our brains. And Mark's going to tell us a little bit more about that later. But thinking about those 3 questions we raised before, where we talked about what inspires you about your work, how much autonomy do you feel? We were asking you also, how do you feel when you work in flow? You can see that those 3 questions are linked to these 3 elements of intrinsic motivation. So we're just going to launch another poll now. So Mark, could you launch poll 2, please?
There we go, poll 2 live.
So this is, what aspect do you need to focus on to increase your intrinsic motivation?
That's great, the votes are coming in. Lots of exercise for this lunchtime. Let's get a few more seconds. Okay, almost everybody in. So we're going to close the poll in 3, 2, 1. Okay. And we have 43% on purpose, then mastery, followed up by the smallest percentage is actually on autonomy.
So more people need to focus on increasing their autonomy to become more intrinsically motivated. So hopefully we'll have some hints and tips to help you do that too. Mark, what helps you to increase your own intrinsic motivation? What area do you focus on here?
Mine is definitely mastery. I can recall lots and lots of times where if I've given a task or I've got a job to do, if I don't feel I've got the skills to do it, it's really demotivating. I like to do things which I'm good at, notwithstanding you like to develop your skills, but actually mastery is a key one for me.
Yeah, and I think we've all had the opportunity to master new and exciting developments throughout this period of working more remotely, haven't we? Okay, so if empowerment is so beneficial, and we know that from how we feel ourselves when we're empowered, as leaders, what stops us from empowering others? And it often starts from our own mindset and drivers. And here are some for us to think about. So first, I can't let go, or can I let go? As a leader, I'm responsible and accountable, so I must be in control. Being in a leadership position and being held accountable can often result in us wanting to keep control. And often it's that nervousness about letting go. We also might feel a little bit insecure. Am I willing to admit to my team that I need help and support? Or will my colleague or direct report be even better at it than me when I'm the leader and I'm supposed to be the expert? Often there can be a lack of trust. Will my colleague, will my direct report be able to complete the task properly and on time? Have I built up enough trust and confidence in my team member that I know they'll complete the task, both from a quality and an execution perspective? And finally, perhaps I can do it better. I'm more senior, I'm more expert, I've perhaps been doing it a little bit longer. Maybe my way of doing things should be better. So our status, our experience, our seniority can often make us feel we ought to be the experts, that we can do it better, and can cause that reluctance to empower others. So we've now got another poll to launch. So Mark, if you could launch poll 3, that would be great.
There you go, poll 3 is going.
So this is about what's stopping you. What's stopping you from empowering others?
Okay, we've got 60% in. Just give it a couple more seconds. Okay, 3, 2, 1. Closing the poll.
Great.
Okay, there we go. So the results are showing that I can do it better. I think I can do it better, coming out at 43%, just ahead of fear of letting go of something, then lack of trust, and then fear of losing something.
Yeah, yeah. So often when we start to think about building that culture of empowerment for our teams and our organizations as leaders, if we can adopt that right mindset and behavior, that we can let go, and others may be able to do it better than us, and we can put some of our trust in our employees and our teams, and we perhaps won't lose something, but we might gain something. If we can encourage ourselves and others, our colleagues and teams, to take accountability, we are going to feel much more empowered, more connected, satisfied and happier with work. The results and statistics around engagement show that. So thinking about that mindset, how can we get ourselves into the right mindset to empower ourselves and others? And it starts with thinking about how we think about change and development, and how we think about how we can manage that change and development for others. And we wanted to introduce you today to the growth mindset, which is a piece of work that came from Carol Dweck, who was a professor at Stanford. And she worked in education and wanted to identify why some student outcomes were better than others and better than expected, despite their IQ being measured as lower. And she found out that it came down to effort, mindset, and self-belief, and how the students approached learning and failure. And it's critical for us to be able to approach learning and failure in a positive way if we truly want to empower others. And you can see from the model here some of the statements that represent how we might think in a growth mindset versus how we might think in a fixed mindset. So failure is an opportunity to grow versus failure is the limit of my abilities. Challenges help me grow versus when I'm frustrated, I give up. I like to try new things. I stick to what I know. So you can see some of that terminology, and critically what we say to ourselves as well in our inner voices when we're approaching new activity and new tasks and new things. So if we do adopt a growth mindset for ourselves and others, we're much more likely to welcome contribution from others and collaborate together more. We're much more likely to include others in our thinking, planning, decision-making, irrespective of seniority, experience, specialism, or length of service. And we've got some great examples in healthcare here. So there was some work being researched on kidneys, and the team brought an engineer, systems engineer, in to look at system design principles in relation to the kidney systems. And he identified that kidney tubules that were previously thought unimportant were actually very important. Another example of 3M bringing in specialist makeup artists to help them develop post-surgery dressings, which help reduce infection. So people that weren't necessarily automatically thought of being necessary or important to think about problem solving, but were bringing different perspective in, gave some great outcomes. So the more people we can bring in, irrespective of that seniority, experience, specialism, or length of service, the more we can get a greater input, which hopefully will lead to a better outcome. And finally, encouraging others to take accountability when empowerment is offered. And this is often the challenge we hear back from leaders. I offer empowerment, but people don't always want to take it and aren't always willing to take it. And it's about giving them the right confidence and support in learning through challenge. Of course, we're not always in a mindset of growth or fixed. We might fluctuate between one and the other depending on the situation. But if we can recognise our thinking in fixed mindset and change it to growth, then that can help us instigate that culture of empowerment. So in the Q&A, add any questions you might have or any comments where you find yourself thinking about things in a fixed mindset versus thinking about things in a growth mindset, and we can pick that up in our Q&A later. And if we have that fundamental belief that everyone has the potential to develop, change and improve, we're in the right mindset to empower others. And as I said, by offering them the right balance of challenge and support, we can encourage them to take accountability. So I'm now going to hand over to Mark, who's going to introduce our 4-step strategy to empower others.
Great
Thanks,
stuff.
Mark.
Thank you, Jo. Just reflecting on the good research culture. So Jo talked about feeling secure, open, inspiring, exciting, supportive. So all of these things are really underpinned by empowered and motivated people. So what we want to share with you is just some tips around a 4-step strategy and some things that you can take away from today to help. I mean, firstly, look at how empowered you are and see if you can kind of develop your own empowerment. And then as leaders, as colleagues, helping you empower your colleagues and your staff as well. So the 4-step strategy is step 1, creating that compelling vision and buy-in, helping to build the fundamental trust which underpins all of this. Having a look at the resources and setting people up for success rather than failure, and then encouraging mastery. So where I reflected on my story of the area of purpose mastery and autonomy is that the mastery one is that if I don't feel I'm good enough to carry out the task, I find it quite demotivating. So how can we encourage mastery? So the first area we're going to have a look at is looking at creating that compelling vision. And Simon Sinek wrote a book called Start With Why. So it's quite easy, and we do tend to start with what needs to be done. The report needs to be delivered, the project needs to be delivered. How are we going to do that? So the processes, the procedures, the systems we have in place. That's quite an easy thing to look at, but actually what Sinek said was that if you start with a why, you can create a really, really strong connection with people, with their motives. And reflecting back on intrinsic motivation, the work that Pink did, that intrinsic motivation can be really, really bolstered and boosted by connecting with the why. Why are we actually doing this? Why do I have to deliver that report? Why do I have to deliver that particular project? What's the bigger picture? So this really is the purpose. It's the belief. He terms it the internal fire behind why people get out of bed and do what they do. If you just consider for a couple of minutes as you're listening to the webinar today of why is it you do what you do? If somebody said, why do you do the job that you do? What response do you give to that? So people, there's another phrase of people don't buy what you do, they buy why you do it. So that purpose is really strong. Anybody who has any gadgets or devices, phones by Apple, why did you buy that from Apple? Apple tend not to sell their products by features and the stuff the phone does, but it's about thinking differently. It's about innovation. It's about creativity. And as consumers, people who buy Apple products buy into that concept of you're part of something different. It's not just a phone, it's an Apple phone. So why does the why matter? And just conscious that this is an NIHR webinar and we have lots of physicians and neurologists and people. So in a very layperson's and high level view is that many of you will be familiar with the triune brain model. And the key thing here is that the limbic system is where emotions are, where emotions are connected. So we have the neocortex, which is more the logic, the rational part of the brain. That really features with the how and the what we do things. But the why really links in with the limbic system. So where Daniel Pink talked about connecting purpose, so the motivations. So if we can connect the why with the limbic system, and the limbic system works a lot faster than the neocortex, then connecting with the emotional brain is more likely to result in buy-in. So one thing to consider as you're developing this compelling vision for people around you, and for you yourselves to just reflect on how empowered am I, actually why is it I do what I do, then starting with why is really important. So it's a good exercise just to connect with that. And also for people that you work with and maybe struggling with motivation, then understand why is it they get out of bed. The why is very personal. How and what can be quite generic and applicable to lots of people, but the why is a very personal thing. So the next area we're going to have a look at is step 2. This was about building trust. So trust is critical for underpinning empowerment and motivation. And there's some work done by Charles Green, who looked at trustworthiness. So trustworthiness is do you rely on the other person? Are they going to do what you expect them to do? Are they predictable? So Charles Green came up with an equation, and me being a scientist, I quite like equations. So, and the equation is, so credibility. So this would be, does a person have the qualifications? Are they saying the right words? They're using the right phraseology? If I reflect on this, if I go to my local GP and I'm working out how trustworthy my GP is, then from a credibility perspective, there's a surgery there. Yep, that's credible, and a receptionist. You go into their surgery. There's qualifications on the wall. They're wearing a tie, which you'd expect of your GP, and they're using a language, even though there's a lot of language I don't understand, but they're using language, which means there's a credibility there. So from a credibility perspective, yep, my GP is high credibility. Then we add in there reliability. So you can be really credible, but if you don't deliver on your promises, then you're not reliable. But my GP, the tendency is that the diagnosis is pretty spot on, and the prescription that I get that results in my ailment disappearing. So solving the problem that I had. So if I go to my GP and I'm pretty confident that whatever they prescribe is going to solve my problem, is that they're pretty reliable. So reliability is high. And then on the numerator, last one on the numerator is the empathy. So how much do I feel they care about me? So from how they've interacted with me, do I get a sense if they do care about my well-being? If I share confidential and sensitive information with them, am I pretty confident they're not going to share that with other people? So how empathetic do I feel they are? And this is the level of trustworthiness. Okay, so GP example, yep, I'm pretty confident I can share what I need to share. And they really do care about finding a diagnosis and a remedy for me. The denominator of our equation is self-interest. So this is how much do I think they care about themselves rather than myself. And from my GP's perspective is I get a sense it's not about self-interest. My GP complains a lot about how the whole system works, but that's not from a self-interest perspective. So actually my GP is a relatively low self-interest, and it's more about finding the right remedy for me. So if I take the trustworthiness, then my GP is great. I feel they're very trustworthy. Now, another example you might take is a generic version of a politician. So if you listen to a politician on television, or if you interact with a politician, then run through the trustworthiness. A generic, they're not all the same, but generally, trustworthiness of politicians is relatively low. And why is that? is there okay, the credibility, is it the credibility of them being qualified for what they do? Are they using the right words? The tendency, are they may be. Reliability, how often do they actually deliver on the promises they give in manifestos and in elections? How much do we feel they actually care about us versus their own self-interest and their own motives? So you can see from a trustworthiness perspective, as humans, it's really easy for us to do this for other people. So the people we interact with get a feeling that for those relationships that aren't quite working so well, or those relationships which are quite challenging, then if you come away from those relationships, then just reflecting on the trust equation is it that the credibility, reliability, empathy, or self-interest, how is that dynamic going? And if I think about some challenging conversations that I've had and challenging relationships I've got, I can actually reflect on the fact that of why I don't trust that person. Is it that they don't deliver what they expected? Is it that I get a sense is that they're in it for themselves? They're just looking at their own objectives and goals rather than myself, so empathy is low? Is it that I feel that they're not qualified to actually do what they're doing? So if we're looking at, if we think about empowerment, if we feel that the person's not trustworthy, the likelihood is we're not going to be fully empowering them. We're going to keep things back because there may be a negative impact on ourselves if they fail to deliver, that it may actually be we're accountable for that. So Joe talked about some of the reasons that we don't empower, and that level of trustworthiness is a key driver. So if we think about other people, relatively straightforward for us to go through the trustworthiness and rank. So you've probably got half a dozen people in your heads already where you're thinking, actually, those are really trustworthy from my perspective, and those aren't. But what about ourselves? Quite often we don't actually look at ourselves. And for those challenging relationships, how does the other person actually see me? And I've come away from some conversations and I've reflected from a trustworthiness perspective. And I've come to the conclusion, actually, a lot of my language was about me and what I need to get out of that challenging situation or that difficult conversation. Therefore, the other person, not even knowing what the trustworthiness equation is, are making an assessment of my trustworthiness. Do I actually deliver on what I promised to deliver? Do I talk with credibility? Am I qualified? Do I have credibility in the other person's eyes? So just have a reflection on maybe a challenging or a difficult relationship that you have, and look at things from the other person's perspective. And Joe is now going to open a poll as to which area would you say is an area that you might need to consider addressing in order to raise your trustworthiness in their eyes. So are you okay for opening that poll, Joe?
Yeah, that's open now. And we can see the votes coming through. So we've got about 50% now. We'll leave it a few more seconds. Okay, so we're coming up to 70%, so the last few seconds, and I'll now close the poll. So sharing those results, we can see here that we have 29% credibility and 29% self-interest, followed by empathy at 27% and reliability at 16%.
That's great, thanks. So that's a pretty good spread across the credibility, empathy, and self-interest. So Joe, just to put you on the spot, so if you reflected on this kind of situation, where might you need to address?
I think it's really interesting actually, because being aware of the model and as part of the work that we do, I reflected on it when I'm meeting new people. And I think sometimes it's when you're starting to work with people that you really have to address the elements of trustworthiness, because once you've built a trust bank with somebody, maybe if you do make a mistake or you don't deliver something on time, they're kind of going to let you off a bit because you've built that trust bank up. So I think for me, it's really important to focus on those top 3 when you're meeting a new person or starting to work with someone for the first time, to get that trust bank built up to allow for any challenges maybe later on. And I think it's about being reliable, saying what you're going to do it when you say it, having that connection, trying to find that empathetic connection, and obviously being knowledgeable about what your work is.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Thanks,
Thank
Jo.
you.
Yeah, and as Jo said there, just to highlight, you don't need the self-interest to go up much to really undermine trustworthiness. So if you put if you related these to a high, low, and medium for each of these elements, and put a number 1 for a low, a 2 for medium, and 3 for high, and put it into the equation, you don't need to go much. Moving from a low to a medium on self-interest actually halves the trustworthiness. So it's just a way of kind of quantifying trustworthiness. Okay, so third step is information and resources. The worst thing is to get people fired up and set off in motion, and they're all motivated and eager to go, and then restrain resources. So resources in this context would be information and data. How often are you making a judgment as to what the other person needs to know in order to be able to carry out that activity without actually asking them? So giving the right level of resources and information is really important, so as not to set them up for failure. In terms of budget, everyone's budget constrained, but making sure the budget constraints don't impact the ability to deliver, because it can be really demotivating if you know there's no chance of you being successful. So being able to offer the right level of money in terms of resources. Having the group, so in terms of team members, so resources in FTEs, do we have enough people to actually do this, or is it going to be a real stretch? And then giving enough time, so not setting people up for fail for delivering a big deliverable and expect it to be done in 3 days. So information and resources covers lots and lots of different areas. It also includes support. So what kind of help and support does the person need? More experienced people might need less. Less experienced people are going to need more. So everyone's going to have a different expectation of what resources they require in order to do the best that they can. And finally, step 4, personal mastery. Mentioned a couple of times before about having the skills and being able to do the job and feel confident to do that is motivating. As you're actually doing the work, then getting better at it is also a motivating factor. It's something you're developing your skills. So as an individual, are you giving opportunities to identify where your skills gaps may be and address those on the job? Because not everybody could be an expert in absolutely every aspect in everything that they do. So the feeling from a human perspective of getting better at something is actually really motivating. As leaders, the questions to ask yourselves are, do you encourage this continuous learning for everybody? Are people allowed to carve out the time to personally develop? Is everyone encouraged to share ideas and welcome contribution? Again, linking back to this foundation of trust, do people feel able and safe in sharing ideas which they may think are daft ideas, and that they're not going to be blamed for something, ridiculed, or there's consequences? Is that sharing encouraged, because that drives this culture of learning? Do you ask for and give meaningful feedback? So do you ask for where you can improve, where you can develop and address your skills gaps? And do you give meaningful feedback to people around you to help them get better at what they're doing? So positive and developmental feedback. And finally, do you show your team, do you actually role model that you're learning? So from the feedback that you're getting about the areas that you can further develop, are you actually role modeling that you're addressing those and getting better of that? The shadow of the leader falls wide. So you really set the tone as leaders around getting better at what you do. So just to recap, So the 4-step strategy, if I take I'm learning to play guitar. I'm not very good, but I'm learning to play. So this is a personal development for me. If we look at the 4-step strategy to empower, so do I feel empowered playing guitar? Well, I think so. I know why I play it. I have a compelling vision. I've connected the why with the purpose. It makes you feel good. I've played guitar in front of a few hundred people, and the buzz from it was amazing. So I've really connected with that limbic system in me of connecting my purpose with why I play guitar. It's not to learn a song, it's actually the feeling that it gives me. Building that trust, so I have a teacher. I trust my teacher is not going to shout at me if I get something wrong, if I don't do my homework in between lessons, which is quite often. Building that trust that they're actually learning as well. So my teacher actually learns things and is very open with, actually, that's really cool what you did there. I'm going to go away and practice it, or I'm not sure of that song. I'm going to go and practice it. That builds trust between us. So remember the trust equation, the credibility, the reliability, and the empathy is definitely there, and not the self-interest. There's a high level of trust between us. We've got the resources. Guitars always help. We use WhatsApp and in-person sessions for jamming and doing lessons, and they're providing me with everything I need in order to set me up for success. And then the encourage personal mastery, so they're learning as well, and I feel like I'm getting better. So that feeling that all of the hours of practice, not quite as many hours as I should be doing, but all the hours of practice I'm doing, I actually feel like I'm getting better. So I've got that personal mastery. Okay, so there's 4 steps to create an empowerment, and hopefully there are a couple of snippets you can take away to help you. There is some further reading, so in the webinar deck, then there's some links here. For the trustworthiness, there is actually trustworthiness self-assessment. So if you follow the link to the trusted advisor, there's a free online assessment. It's quite interesting when you get the results back, is that being completely open, is that I thought I was more trustworthy than the assessment came back, which has been real food for thought. And that relates to that piece about not coming across as being overly self-interested in those conversations. That's really helped me, actually. So with that, I can see that the questions have been coming in. So we are going to now hand over to Holly, who's going to navigate us through the Q&A.
Excellent, thank you very much, both of you. What an interesting session, and lots for us to think about and contemplate there. We've got 15 questions in so far, but if anyone's got any additional questions they haven't added yet, please do. But we'll start off at the top, where we've got the questions with the most votes. So first of all, one of my team members doesn't want to take responsibility for anything. What can I do? So not wanting any ownership by the sounds of it. Mark, should we go to you first for that one?
Yep, can do. So I'll give my response to this, and then Joe, please jump in. It might be worth asking why. When we think about the environment being created for the team, what's kind of motivating? Why is it they don't want to take responsibility? Is it that if they do something wrong, then they get blamed for it, or there's some repercussions? So what I would say, it's being curious about why it is, what's underpinning that, and what can you do to help there?
Yeah, I think I'd totally agree with that. It's about really digging in and having a really good open conversation about what are the challenges. So asking questions, being very open, curious, and trying to work out what is it that's stopping them. So a bit like we talked about the blockers that might be stopping us as leaders, what's stopping them?
Great, thank you. How can I trust others when they let me down? And 9 people have voted for that one.
Oh, so again, we talked a little bit about building the trust bank and the trust equation. And I think, we are all human. We do make mistakes, and we have to accept that, and we have to learn from our mistakes. But it's about working through where on that that equation might the challenge be? Is it a credibility issue that they've let you down on? Is it a reliability, or an empathy issue, or a self-interest issue? And if, irrespective of which one it is, it's then having an open conversation about it and trying to remember and be kind to others, that if they have made a mistake, and maybe it's an unusual mistake, then there might be again a reason for that. So thinking about that trust bank, what have they done before, and how can you make sure that's not going to happen in the future.
Great. So interesting one. Again, 10 people voted for this one. How do I tackle a member of staff who's too confident and not aware of their lack of expertise and the impact that that has? So go to you for that one, Mark, first.
Yep, so this one's around giving feedback constructively again. So that there's a way of skillfully doing that in a way that is not seen as a personal attack. The important thing here is that, you know, that someone is too confident with negative impacts, they may be not aware of it. So there's various frameworks of being able to give feedback in a way which identifies the behaviour, the impact that behaviour is having, allowing the other person then to recognise, and they may be aware of it and may not be aware of it, and then for you both to come up with solutions and actions in order for them to adjust that behaviour going forwards.
Great. Okay, so how would you articulate the difference between empowering others and delegating? Or isn't there one?
Well, I guess that might be the difference between having an open discussion around engaging somebody into an activity and discussing why we're doing what we're doing, how we're going to do it, and agreeing that together, versus telling somebody. Delegating may seem a little bit more tell, but where we can have those really good discussions about why we're doing what we're doing and agreeing how we're, you know, giving kind of a sense of direction and a sense of outcome, but actually it's up to you how you do it. Let you know if you need any help and support, then please have a conversation with me about that. But giving them the freedom to then decide themselves, that might be more empowering, I would say. But yes, they're pretty interchangeable.
Okay, so we've now got how do you avoid empowering somebody to the point where they begin to take over or lose respect for your authority?
Interesting question. So yeah, I've got a vision in my mind of, you know, those toys that you wind up, that you've kind of wound it up so much and it goes absolutely mad after that. I mean, remember that the creating empowering situation, you create the empowering situation, but the other person feels empowered. So that there is a creating the expectations and the vision. So we talked about the compelling visions, why you're doing something, and then providing the support that in terms of resources. That might be more about support of giving them the feedback as to what's going a little bit too far and what's acceptable, because the other person may be, you know, really energized and motivated, and you want to ensure it doesn't become distractive and destructive, but you don't want to demotivate the person. You got any builds, Joe?
Yeah, I think again it's about you know, we talked about the different levels of balance of challenge and support, and it's recognizing who needs that balance, that support dialing down and the challenge dialing up. Yeah, so different people will be at different stages of their careers, different levels of experience, and so the people that perhaps are a little bit more experienced and more you trust more, you're going to put less support in. But if you see they're going a little bit off, you might have to dial that support back up.
Okay, so we've got a few questions next around motivation. So first one being, how do you keep people motivated when working virtually?
So this is has been a kind of challenge, I think, for us all, as a lot of people have been working virtually over the last few months, and maybe for longer to come. I think that the element of motivation when working virtually is really supported by good communication. So there's something around being in touch with people in a way that is positive in terms of setting direction, setting goals. We're having to do a lot of reprioritizing at the moment and maybe changing course. So having very clear direction and goals and understanding why we're having to change our course and what benefit that's going to bring. And then giving people the freedom to be able to do it themselves, but also checking in with them from an emotional perspective, given that it has been a bit challenging for people, especially if they're not used to working virtually. So there's something around focusing on task, process, changing, adaptability, but also just checking in on that empathy piece and making sure people are feeling okay.
Great. Mark, sorry.
Yeah, I think it's that there's nothing like demotivating people by ambiguity and uncertainty. So it's that over communication. It's actually communicate a bit more than you would normally do, and communicate on things that would normally be really obvious. So success is what's going on. So there is a term, strategically over communicate, that helps people engage and know what's going on. Which creates a kind of an empowered feeling, because at least some of that uncertainty and ambiguity is gone. And the other thing, in terms of resources, talked about time before, is give people a bit more time to do things. So in the virtual world, its timelines are different to the previous normal. So as we go forwards, giving people a bit more time, so they then feel they have the resources and can feel motivated by that.
Great. So there's two questions next. I think we'll probably link them. So how do I motivate people who lack drive or initiative? And then equally, if you've got members of staff who've got a fixed mindset, how are you able to support them to recognise it and deal with it?
So I think in terms of the growth mindset, that's a fixed mindset, should I say, that's often is a confidence issue. So people will feel that they're only good at certain things, and they may have been told as they grow up they weren't, they were good at this but they weren't good at that, and that kind of played through school and family, and so they've created a very kind of fixed mindset in their brain about what they're good at, what they're not good at, what they're confident with, what they're not confident with. So it's about really unpicking that confidence and giving people confidence. So perhaps trying a coaching approach to management, so supporting people, asking them what they might do to resolve that particular challenge or issue, talking it through with them. In terms of drive and initiative, it's coming back to purpose and thinking about that autonomy, mastery and purpose. So what really gets them out of bed in the morning? Yeah, what is it that they love about their work that they would do irrespective of the pay? Yeah. What strengths do they have? What are they good at? And what can they do even more of? We focus so much of our development time on gaps and skill gaps and weaknesses. But if we flip it into strengths, how can we use our strengths differently to overcome some of those gaps and weaknesses? Or how can we use our strengths to get even better? Then that is highly motivating and highly engaging.
Okay, so somebody here who's saying that they really struggle and find it difficult not being overly prescriptive when delegating, wanting to be kind of in control of it because of past experiences that they've had where maybe they've not given that direction and the quality's not been as good as they want it to be. Is there any advice that you've got of how they can have some control without it necessarily being so didactic?
There is a bit of a reflection on the trustworthiness. So the perception and the behaviours for me could be driven by the fact that the other person hasn't delivered as expected. So a reliability and a credibility issue of undermining trustworthiness. The way here is that it's great that you struggle with not being too prescriptive. So you don't want to be too prescriptive, but you feel you have to in order to get the job done. There are ways of reflecting on understanding what the root causes and reasons for the poor quality in the past was, and then agreeing some strategies in order to make sure that doesn't happen again. Quite often, regular check-ins, So the risk is that if you micromanaging is really demotivating and really disempowering. So being directive, prescriptive, and micromanaging is not going to create an empowered individual, a motivated individual. But there might be frameworks and strategies you can put in place in order to have regular check-ins as a more of a monitoring and oversight rather than being prescriptive. So have a look at, so the first thing I would say is, understand why was it poor quality? Because actually it may be the vision and the expectations and clarity of roles, responsibilities could have been communicated differently in the past. So there is a bit of just a self-reflection there, but then also the root cause analysis and the discussion with the individual.
Yeah, I think I'd just add to that as well, really focusing on why you're doing what you're doing, and is that clear to the individual that you're working with? Do they understand the importance of the work? Do they understand where that works, how it's going to be used? Do they understand who it's going to? So really having that clear upfront conversation around expectation, outcome, and then as Mark says, putting the checks and balances in to keep monitoring and making sure that it's at the quality that you need it to be at.
So, big question next. We never have sufficient resources. What can we do?
That's such a difficult question, and I think a very common question and very common issue. And it really is around focusing on what can we do with the resources that we've got, and making realistic outcomes. So identifying what have we got with our time, what have we got with our budget, what have we got with our resources, what realistically can we achieve. So when we're setting our goals, we're probably familiar with the SMART goal framework. Are they, specific? Are they measurable? Are they achievable? Are they realistic? And are they time bound? So really thinking, what can we do with what we've got? Anything to add, Mark?
It's that two-way dialogue, isn't it? Because the restricted resources is what is it? Necessity is the mother of invention. So actually, a lot of creativity comes out of that. But it's having that adult two-way conversation of, you're expecting me to deliver this. I'm really motivated to actually do that, but I just haven't got. This is what I can do with the resources, because that creates that trust. So again, I always come back to trustworthiness because that creates a credibility in what you're saying, which increases the trust the other person has in you to actually deliver with those resources or not, as the case may be.
Great. So we've got a number of questions here that are basically talking about working in a team where people can't let go, where they want control over what's happening, where you're maybe being seen as too junior to have an opinion, and therefore you've got to do things in the prescribed way that's being fed down to you. And really sort of all of them are asking, how do you tackle this? How do you approach these people that either aren't taking you seriously because you've not got enough experience, or just can't cope with anybody having their own ideas because they want it done their own way?
Yeah, that's really tough and really difficult. And I think it's about opening up the channels of communication and trying to make sure that you are proving yourself from a reliability, credibility perspective, but really focusing on that empathy and trying to open up the communication to ask, would it be possible? Could we think about working in a different way? Could we think about perhaps having a conversation where we all pitch our ideas in? So, opening up that thought process, or even when the opportunity is there, is offering a suggestion. So you're starting to build the trust bank for somebody else. Anything to add there, Mark?
The only other thing, it depends on the individuals, but the senior experienced person seeing you as junior, it might, I don't know, opportunities for them to be a mentor to help you. So if you look at your own personal mastery and you're getting better, then what better is that the senior people is that reaching out to them and asking them. So the openness of putting your hand up and having the courage to say, actually, I don't know, teach me, help me here, might actually change the dynamic as well.
Yeah,
it depends on the relationship you have.
Giving that opportunity to then, by asking them for their help, I've had this idea, what do you think about it? So you're kind of tapping into their expertise and their support. Brilliant.
So kind of other end of the coin here, I suppose, is that we've got somebody who is talking about it sounds like imposter syndrome. So they've moved into a team. I've lost it now because it's been changing. But they've been moved into a team where they've got a lot of research knowledge, but they've not got the specialist knowledge of the team that they've moved into. So they're kind of struggling with, how do you empower people but also get them to believe in you when you maybe haven't got quite the same background as them? I hope I've asked that right.
So we're thinking here about opening up the team to a diversity of thinking, yeah? And we talked about examples where just because you aren't the expert doesn't mean you don't have a valid voice or opinion in this decision. And we talked about actively bringing non-experts in to open up diversity of thinking. So I think it's about being that person that perhaps hasn't got the level of expertise required, is kind of being open about that, but saying that you know, explaining what expertise you do have and how that might transfer across or be helpful, and being curious, you know, asking the questions. There's nothing, the easiest way to build trust with somebody is to say, I need your help. It's the most powerful connection in terms of trust. So again, talking to colleagues, being quite open. I've got this brilliant experience, but I'm not as experienced in this area. What would you suggest? How could I learn? What's the best place for me to go and learn about it? How could you help me learn about it? So really showing vulnerability is a brilliant way to build trust, and it sets you up for then a good, trustful working relationship in the future. Great. Mark, anything to add on that one?
I'd say, don't beat yourself up. You don't have to be. I've had in my career so many roles where I've not been the technical expert, but that's not been my job. My job is actually you pull the technical experts in and you put your hand up and say, actually, this isn't. It's having the courage to say, I don't know this level of detail. That's why you're here, and this is how we can work together. So just think about the great leaders. Some of the really great leaders, they've not been the technical experts. Their expertise is to pull together people, the right people with the right skills.
Great. So I've got someone here, interesting question. Do you have any advice on how you can empower and share workload with someone else who's in the same role as you, but they're newer? So you're a bit worried that they might excel and kind of be better than you and outshine you. And so you're kind of wanting to work collaboratively with them, but there is that nervousness perhaps.
Yeah. So again, it's thinking about everybody's unique. Everybody has their own unique set of strengths and skills and experience. And it's about what can we bring to the party collaboratively to be even better. So that person will have a different set of strengths, and we can identify our strengths. There's loads of tools that help us pull out our strengths if we don't know them already, and obviously have a different background, skills, experience, and as the other person. And it's how do we bring that together and collaborate effectively while still being able to maintain working with our own strengths and showing what we're capable of. And really focusing energy on how can I develop myself, my own mastery, but complementary to the outcome of the team. It's not just about what I can do, it's about what's the collective outcome for the team.
Yeah, that was one of the key things why we don't empower. We don't want to let something go because we're at risk of, we feel like we're going to lose something. And it's thinking in a way that if this other person excels, actually that's been down to you as well. So the collective goal is the reflective back of you being part of that.
So I've got the next question, which relevant, but it might be that we need to pick up with this one outside actually. But talking about how you can get an appropriate mentor who can empower you if you don't feel like senior people above you are doing that for you.
Yeah, key thing, you'll have, I mean, think about people that you admire, so that they may not be in the same line as you, or the same department or the same group, even the same location or same organization, but you'll have come across people that you admire, and it's worth reaching out to them, and in terms of that mentor relationship. So in terms of finding appropriate mentors, I think that there is the mentor program as well. So reach out to the academy, and for helps in identifying a mentor.
Great, thank you. So you mentioned not doing your guitar homework, Mark, which leans on the power of failure, which is not explored well so much in the NHS. Where does failure sit within the methodology and the areas you've been discussing?
It's knowing that failure is an opportunity to get better. So Thomas Edison said, "I've not failed. I've just found 10,000 times that this light bulb thing doesn't work." Yeah. So the same thing with me is that me failing to actually learn and do my homework means that I know I need to carve out time to actually do it, because I found that if I put the work in, I actually see the benefit of my improved playing. So it's looking at failure as an opportunity to get better. The key thing here is having that culture. So kind of a culture of continuous learning, a culture of empowerment means that failure is seen as a fantastic opportunity to find a better way of doing things, not as a blame and something negative.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, most people don't set out to fail purposefully. And it's about, again, having that great feedback when there has been a failure, having that great feedback conversation about, what happened, what was the impact, and what can we learn from this, and how can we avoid this happening in the future?
So this person is asking, they've got a really strong leadership team who they've got unified and clear vision. However, there is a tendency to stifle innovation and hold back on delegation. How could they be encouraged to share tasks more widely?
So this could be one of those opportunities to feedback, is that if that clear vision is there, yet what you're seeing are behaviours which are stifling that, then being able to flag up the behaviour and what that impact is on yourself, of not being able to share ideas and holding on to those tasks. So again, looking at the root causes of what's actually driving that. Maybe it's with individual leaders on that team, just to kind of feed that back. So it doesn't have to be in a big meeting.
And we've talked quite a lot about feedback, and I think the real key to successful feedback in whichever discussion we're having is about making the intent of that conversation known and upfront. So I'm feeding this back because I want to help you improve, or I'm feeding this back because I might be able to contribute even more to the team than I am currently. So really being articulate about what the intent of the feedback is, because it's not an intent to criticize anyone or make anyone feel bad. It's about trying to do something differently or better.
Great. So this next one is thinking about the fact that sort of prescribing and delegating can be a default behaviour, especially when you're under pressure or you're in a really high-paced environment, and the wanting to empower people and the big picture thinking can just go out of the window. Is there a way that can be avoided, or that you can learn to stop that being your default?
Yeah, this is an interesting one. My background's the aviation industry, and we did a lot of work around kind of safety critical incidents and how do we empower people still in that moment of safety critical incident. And one of the great examples was the pilot landing the plane on the Hudson, because he asked his co-pilot, what should we do? And he kind of involved him in that decision, and it was obviously a successful outcome. So there is something about, we go into command control in critical times, busy times, and it's quite normal that we do that. But there are still techniques to be able to recognise that we're doing that and build in getting contribution from others in that fast-paced environment. And it's a quick check-in. Are we all okay? Are we all on board? Are we doing the right thing here? Is there anybody that wants to suggest anything different? And being mindful of that and being aware of the fact that that's our tendency in those situations.
Mark, anything to add on that one?
It's just creating that space, take a step back and say, I can get on and do this, but it's quicker and the pressure's on, but actually should I be? So just because you can, that shouldn't mean you should, especially as a leader. If you're really bought into creating this culture in your team, then these are the first instances where the whole thing crashes down. So taking a step back and saying, this doesn't feel comfortable, but actually it's the best thing to do in the long run. And also bear in mind, so when the pressure's on, and if you feel that your leader's empowered you and has the trust in you, just think how motivated you are, you know, through the times when there isn't crisis. So these are the times when you can really build the great foundations of great team culture.
Great. So the next one is asking, really, is there a sweet spot in expectation of others in order to empower them in the right way? So what's the impact of having either too low or too high expectations?
So we're back to the dialing of challenge and support here. So everybody's going to be different. Everyone's got their own levels of confidence, experience, and they're going to need a different level of challenge versus a different level of support. And it's about having a really open discussion and agreeing what does that look like, so that we don't either place too high expectation or too low. So checking in. This is, I believe that you're totally capable of this, and this is what we want to do, and I'm, you know, happy for you to determine how you might want to do it. What do you need from me? So always clear conversations.
And our last question is, I think, a bit of an empowerment inception. I feel my manager lacks motivation and empowerment. How do I help empower her to then be able to empower me?
Great.
It's a bit of a, interesting one from a chicken and egg. Is that the question is, why do you need somebody else to empower you? Because you may be, intrinsic motivation is you're kind of self-motivating. So if you're really clear about the purpose connected to that, you feel you have the autonomy there and the mastery to do that, then you can be self-motivating. But from your manager lacks motivation, then, you know, understanding what makes them tick, why they do what they do. It could be that they may feel a lack of confidence in them being a good manager, which is why they're coming across as they are. So it might be worth exploring. It's kind of having an exploration conversation with them to find out why they do, what makes them tick. Because, you know, finding that spark can help them maybe realize that they are. Ultimately, you can't force someone to be motivated. What you can do is you create the conditions for them to motivate, and you want them to be intrinsically motivating rather than extrinsically using, you know, carrots or sticks in order to motivate.
Yeah, I think as well, you know, adding in opportunities to have conversations where you can explain what you might be able to bring to the party. Yeah, so I've had this idea, but again, respectful of the fact that it's a manager, but I've had this brilliant idea, but I just wanted to run it past you, because I'm sure you will know whether it will work or not. What do you think? And then hopefully by tapping into their status, seniority, expertise, it opens up the conversation and you get to a position where, oh, actually, yeah, why don't we give it a go? But it's really building that empathy connection.
Excellent. Well, thank you both very much, because that was a very long Q&A.
Yeah, great question.
Oh, yeah.
Really good question
there, I think. So thank you both again for this really, really interesting session, and hopefully everyone's found the webinar beneficial and feel able to implement some of those behaviours that you've explored. As I mentioned at the start of the webinar, for those of you joining us live, as we close the session out now, you'll be able to complete an evaluation form, and the link is also in the chat. And by doing that, it gives you the opportunity to provide us with your email address, then we can send you a copy of the slides that we've gone through today, as well as getting your feedback. All of our past webinars can be found on the NIHR TV YouTube channel under the Development Support Webinars playlist. Thank you all for your time, and we hope you enjoy the rest of your day.